This old stenographer is going to protect us? The man laughed in the courthouse hallway. Old, weak, unarmed. But there was something in Margaret Collins' posture. Not fear, but calculation. Not panic, but precision. The man didn't know that the woman sitting behind that stenography machine had spent 30 years hunting the most dangerous criminals in America. You see, for 35 years, everyone in Judge Williams's courtroom saw Margaret the same way. Just the quiet lady in the corner, typing away, recording every word. The lawyers ignored her. The defendants never looked at her. Even the judge barely acknowledged her existence. But when death threats started coming, when witnesses refused to testify, when the U.S. Marshals couldn't arrive for weeks, that's when Margaret Collins had to make a choice. Stay hidden behind her stenography machine or reveal who she really was. Welcome to Echo Stories. Before we begin this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. The Davidson County Courthouse in Nashville, Tennessee, was a grand building where justice was supposed to prevail. On the third floor, Courtroom 312 had seen thousands of cases over the decades. Drug dealers, white-collar criminals, violent offenders, they all passed through Judge Robert Williams's courtroom. And for 35 years, Margaret Collins had recorded every word. At 68, Margaret was the most senior court stenographer in the building. She arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, set up her stenotype machine, and took her position in the corner of the courtroom. Gray-haired, soft-spoken, wearing simple cardigans and reading glasses, she was practically invisible. That's exactly how she preferred it. Margaret had seen everything in her decades behind that machine. Murderers confessing, drug lords threatening witnesses, corrupt officials lying under oath. She recorded it all with the same calm professionalism, never showing emotion, never getting involved. But this case was different. The People vs. Vincent Vinnie Torino was a major racketeering trial. Torino was accused of running a multi-million-dollar protection racket, extortion, and money laundering through legitimate businesses across Nashville. The prosecution's case hung on one key witness, Sarah Martinez, a bookkeeper who had kept detailed records of Torino's illegal operations. Sarah was scheduled to testify today, but she wasn't here. Judge Williams called a recess when Sarah failed to appear. In his chambers, the prosecution team was in panic mode. "Your Honor," said Assistant District Attorney Patricia Hayes, "we received this an hour ago." She handed Judge Williams a manila envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with cut-out letters from magazines. "If the bookkeeper talks, she dies. Her family dies. Drop the case." Judge Williams frowned. "Have you contacted the U.S. Marshals? They're stretched thin with 3 other high-profile cases. Earliest they can provide protection is 2 weeks. And Ms. Martinez?" "Terrified. She's refusing to testify without protection." From her stenography station, Margaret observed the hushed conversations, the worried glances. She'd seen this before. Witnesses intimidated into silence, cases falling apart because people were too scared to tell the truth. But something was different this time. The threat felt more immediate, more personal. When court resumed, Margaret noticed 3 men in the gallery she'd never seen before. They weren't taking notes like reporters. They weren't dressed like lawyers. They sat in the back, watching, waiting. During the lunch break, Margaret stepped into the hallway and overheard one of them on the phone. "Yeah, we know where she lives. Soon as court ends, we pay a visit." Margaret's blood went cold. These weren't just making threats, they were planning to act on them. She approached Ada Hayes in the hallway. "Excuse me, Ms. Hayes. I couldn't help but notice you're having security concerns." Patricia looked at the elderly stenographer with barely concealed impatience. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins, but this really isn't—" "I know where Sarah Martinez is," Margaret said quietly. Patricia stopped. "What?" "I also know those 3 men in the back of the courtroom aren't court observers. They're surveillance, and they're planning to move on Ms. Martinez tonight." "How could you possibly know that?" Margaret looked directly at her. "Because I've been watching criminals for a lot longer than you have." That evening, Patricia Hayes found herself in the unusual position of sitting in her car outside Margaret Collins's modest suburban home, wondering why she was taking security advice from a court stenographer. Margaret opened the door, wearing the same cardigan she'd worn in court, but something was different. Her posture was straighter, her eyes sharper. "Come in," Margaret said. "We need to talk." Patricia followed her into a living room that looked like any other retired woman's home. Floral patterns, family photos, china cabinet. But then Margaret opened a closet, and Patricia's assumptions shattered. Inside were certificates, commendations, and photos. Margaret Collins in a U.S. Marshal's uniform. Margaret receiving the Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service. Margaret with other federal agents clearly in leadership positions. "You were a Marshal?" Patricia breathed. "Deputy U.S. Marshal. Fugitive investigations, witness protection, high-value target apprehension, 30 years, 1975 to 2005. But why are you working as a stenographer?" Margaret smiled. "Because after 30 years of chasing the worst humanity has to offer, I wanted to watch justice happen from the other side. And because criminals never suspect the lady with the typing machine." "Sarah Martinez is at her sister's house in Franklin," Margaret continued, "but those men will find her by tomorrow. They're not amateurs." "So what do? "We do what I've done hundreds of times before. We protect the witness and get her to court." Patricia shook her head. "Mrs. Collins, I appreciate the offer, but this isn't your job anymore. You're retired." "Retired from active duty, not from the mission." Margaret moved to her kitchen table where she'd already spread out maps, photos, and notes. "Vincent Torino has been threatening witnesses for 20 years. I've been documenting his patterns every time he or his people came through my courtroom." She pointed to a thick folder. "Dates, times, methods, associates. I've been building a case against him for 2 decades. "Why didn't you report this?" "To whom?" "I'm a stenographer. Who would believe me?" Patricia realized she was looking at the most comprehensive criminal intelligence file on Torino she'd ever seen. "But if you testify..." "My testimony would be hearsay. But Sarah's testimony, backed by what I know about Torino's intimidation tactics, becomes unshakable." The next morning, Margaret didn't report to the courthouse. Instead, she drove to Franklin in her modest Honda Civic. To anyone watching, she looked like a grandmother visiting family, but in her purse was her retired Marshal's badge, .38 revolver she was still certified to carry, and 30 years of experience in witness protection. Sarah Martinez was a 34-year-old single mother who had kept meticulous financial records for 3 years before realizing she was documenting organized crime. When she'd tried to quit, the threats began. "Sarah," Margaret said gently when she arrived, "my name is Margaret Collins. I'm here to get you to court safely. Are you a police officer?" "Former U.S. Marshal, and I've been waiting 35 years to put Vincent Torino away." Margaret's plan was simple. Hide in plain sight. 2 elderly women, a grandmother and her niece, driving to Nashville for a doctor's appointment. But as they left Franklin, Margaret spotted a dark sedan following them. "Sarah, I need you to stay calm. We're being followed." "Oh God, they found us!" "They found us, but they don't know that I found them first." Margaret had been running surveillance and counter-surveillance operations since before Sarah was born. Over the next hour, she demonstrated why the U.S. Marshals had trusted her with the most dangerous assignments: 3 lane changes, 2 strategic stops, and 1 perfectly timed merge later. The sedan was stuck in traffic while Margaret and Sarah were 10 miles away. "How did you do that?" Sarah asked, amazed. "Practice," Margaret replied simply. When they arrived at the courthouse, Torino's men were waiting. But so was Margaret's backup, 3 active U.S. Marshals she'd called from her personal contacts. Margaret Collins? The lead marshal, Deputy Johnson, seemed surprised. "Ma'am, I thought you retired." "I did, but this case needed finishing." As they escorted Sarah into the building, Torino himself appeared in the hallway with his lawyer and bodyguards. "Well, well," Torino said, recognizing Margaret. "The typing lady thinks she's a cop now?" Margaret stopped walking and looked directly at him. For 35 years, she'd listened to men like Torino threaten, intimidate, and corrupt. Never once had she been able to respond. "Mr. Torino," she said calmly, "you've been making threats in my courtroom for 20 years. I recorded every word, every gesture, every intimidation tactic." Torino's smile faded. "And today, you're going to learn that the typing lady was taking notes for a very long time." Sarah Martinez took the stand and delivered devastating testimony about Torino's criminal enterprise. But more importantly, Margaret's decades of observation provided context that made every threat, every intimidation attempt, part of a clear pattern of witness tampering. For the first time in 35 years, Margaret Collins was called as a witness instead of just recording other witnesses. "Mrs. Collins," the prosecutor asked, "in your 30 years as a Deputy U.S. Marshal and 35 years as a court stenographer, have you observed patterns of witness intimidation?" "I have." "And have you observed such patterns with regard to the defendant?" Margaret looked directly at Torino. For 23 years, every time Vincent Torino appeared in this courtroom, witnesses either recanted their testimony, failed to appear, or later reported being threatened. I documented every instance. The jury hung on every word. Vincent Torino was convicted on 17 counts of racketeering, extortion, and witness tampering. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. As court adjourned, Sarah Martinez approached Margaret with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did. You told the truth." Judge Williams also approached. "Margaret, in all my years on the bench, I've never seen anything like what you did. Your Honor, I just did what I've always done. I made sure the record was complete." The following Monday, Margaret Collins returned to her stenography station in Courtroom 312. Same cardigan, same reading glasses, same quiet professionalism. But now, everyone who passed through that courtroom knew that the lady with the typing machine was watching and remembering. And when justice needed a guardian, she was ready. Young prosecutors sought her advice. Defense attorneys treated her with new respect. And criminals? They learned to be very careful what they said in Courtroom 312, because Margaret Collins was always listening, always recording. And after 35 years, she'd learned that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone overlooks. And so, in a Nashville courthouse, it was proven once again that heroes don't always wear badges or carry guns. Sometimes they carry stenotype machines and sit quietly in corners, watching, waiting, and protecting justice one recorded word at a time. Real protectors understand that justice isn't just about the verdict, it's about making sure the truth can be told safely. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe stories like this should continue to be told, support Echo Stories by subscribing. See you in the next video. And remember, that quiet person recording your words might be the guardian of justice itself.